Affect Autism in its 10th year of providing free supportive content for your DIR journey.
All of Affect Autism's podcasts are produced and edited by Daria Brown. Please note that the views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved, do not constitute educational or medical advice, and do not necessarily reflect the views of Affect Autism, Daria Brown, nor ICDL and associated parties. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with their individual circumstances for specific support.
You're listening to the We Chose Play podcast from Affect Autism, where affect is the #1 tool we use in supporting development through playful interactions. Welcome back, floor timers. I am very excited today to have back Mary Beth Stark, who joins us from Atlanta, where she's been a speech language pathologist for over 40 years at Floortime Atlanta, colleagues with many other guests that I've had on the podcast before. She's also a DIRFloortime Expert Training Leader. And our topic is revisiting an old blog post that we had that we're updating and bringing some new insights into it. So it is replacing the old one. And the topic is how pre-social abilities are pre-language and gets into reciprocity and the development of communication. So I'm super eager to go over this material again, but also to hear some of the insights you've had in the last 5 or so years since we had originally recorded that podcast. Welcome, Mary Beth.
Well, thank you, Daria. Hello, everybody. I just wanted to add to what Daria said, is that I have been a therapist, just a therapist. I don't want to say just a therapist, but not a researcher. And I didn't wear those hats. I've worked with kids and parents for 45 years, and I was lucky enough to start doing floor time right out of graduate school. So I never did regular pull-out therapy. I've always been play-based and worked with kids and their parents. But what I think is, to me, is interesting about my journey is that in playing with kids and in following the DIR model, which is joining them and building a relationship and looking at their individual differences. I have always approached therapy that way. And in the 70s, Dr. Greenspan wasn't very well known with what he was doing. And the whole idea of following a child's lead was just crazy at that point. You know, back in the day, I was in a public school-based preschool as a speech and language therapist, and the goal was to get kids to say, I want cookies, I want milk. And it's fairly easy if a child has an oral motor ability to do it, they'll imitate you to get cookies and milk. And that's a very easy thing to do. And on paper, it looks like a big... it's a wonderful thing. And it is a wonderful thing. Words are wonderful things. But what I found is that those kids weren't necessarily looking at me, and they weren't really realizing that we were communicating. They knew that this was what you were supposed to do to get a milk or a cookie or a carrot or whatever snack was that day, but really didn't understand the social interaction piece of it. Along with that, I noticed that I did get a lot more social interaction when I was over by a fan and we were ripping up pieces of paper towel and letting them go in front of the fan. Now, they weren't using any words, but they were looking at me and they were smiling, and we were running off getting the pieces of paper towel. And that was so much more satisfying to me and much more satisfying to the child. And I think out of that is where they learn how to communicate, not with the words. When you're not ready to use words, it's about the interaction before the words come into, before kids are ready to use words. Anyway, so over time, I have looked more in depth at how the ability to say words, not say words, but use words comes into play, knowing that and it's still happening today, many speech and language people, when they start to see kids and they're not talking, the first thing they do is want to teach them words or want to give them a device so that they can use words. And that is I think a fabulous goal for some kids. But for some kids, it's just going to be something that they'll memorize and will only be able to use it for the things that they've been taught to use it for, which is not communication. That's a skill, and communication is a social, living, dynamic thinking process. And I think it's all about these pre-social skills is what sets you up to use words. Anyway, what Floortime does is it is a model for social thinking. And social thinking it's a social cognitive skill. And it's the process of interpreting and understanding what are the thoughts, the feelings, the intentions, and the behaviors of other people in social contexts. And we start to realize what other people are thinking, and we also start to realize what is our impact on other people. And that's where the real power of communication comes out of. I have found in my experience that kids that don't have a strong ability to socially think are the kids who will use language, and they will use language for needs and wants and to regulate others. But they won't use language to talk about an idea or what they did yesterday or what makes them happy or what makes them sad or what they really like. And to me, that's the power of communication. And I believe with the kids that are using language for needs and wants and for regulating others is a wonderful thing. But that's the place to start with the ability to really understand the power of language.
So what do you mean by to regulate others? They use language for their wants and needs and to regulate others. What do you
tell
mean?
other people what to do. So if you're offering a cookie and they don't want it, they'll just push your hand away, or they'll move you out of the way. They're trying to regulate where you are insofar as their spatial awareness is or where their environment is. If they don't want you there, they'll move you out of the way. Or, that's what I'm talking about. Regulate another's behavior.
Okay, yes, because autistic kids are very good at, and again, there's a wide range of autistic kids. The I in the DIR model is all about individual differences.
Mm-hmm.
But the kids maybe that you're seeing in therapy, they are not shy about letting you know if they don't want something.
No, they are not. No, they are not. But even the kids that do that, I think it's important to let them know that they are heard and, okay, I'll move out of the way. And then, in my experience, 10 seconds later, get back in their way. And then they have to do it again. And then you say, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you only meant it that one time. Mm-hmm. Just so it sets up the back and forth. And it also sets up, there's a person here with me. And that holds a whole lot of weight once kids really realize that there's something to this. And then it's more that she'll get me what I want, but maybe she won't. So I have to keep an eye on her. Anyway, in a fun way.
Yes.
So in talking about the development of social thinking, it actually starts before babies are even born. Because when they're in utero, they can hear their mother's voice or their father's voice. And although they can't hear the words, they can hear the tone, they can hear the melody, they can hear the intensity. They start to realize that at certain times when they hear speech, they don't know it's speech, but they hear it, and they notice that there's stress at the beginning of apparently some important things. So if a mother is singing Ba Ba Black Sheep, they know that Ba Ba Black Sheep is an important part. And so then when they're born and they start to hear these stressed phonemes, they start to realize, okay, I better pay attention to that. That's meaningful. And so even in utero, they're starting to realize what's meaningful about what's going on out there. So when we when I was talking about the definition of what social thinking is, it's about knowing your impact on other people and other people's impact on you. And in order to know that, you have to be, number one, a pattern detective, know what the patterns are. And you have to have an idea of what your own patterns are. And you have to have an idea of what your parents or your caregivers' patterns are. And babies are learning this as soon as they're born. They're starting to read other people's patterns and they're starting to know about themselves. So newborns have varying sensitivities. Obviously, they all have individual differences. And some babies are more sensitive than others. Some babies are less sensitive than others. But what they all do is read their environment as to what is a comfortable experience and what isn't. And then they file it away. The thing that's interesting about babies is they don't focus on one thing singularly as if they're attending through a flashlight. Okay, I'm thinking of this sound now, so let me focus on that. They hear sounds and they're having movement and there's all kinds of things going on. So that when they attend more like a camping light that's 360 degrees and they're taking in all the information in a room and the next room and behind them and in front of them. And they're able to take that information and file each individual part of an experience away and knowing what they like and what they don't like. When that happens, say for example, if a door slams, that they may judge that as, oh, I don't like that. That made me, I don't like that. So it gets filed away in the I don't like that. And at the same time, simultaneously, they startle. So that's their motor response to what they hear. So as they take in information as a baby, they develop these patterns. They have a sensory experience, they judge it, and then there's a motor pattern that happens almost simultaneously. So babies are figuring themselves out in that way. Caregivers then, who also have varying nervous systems and varying abilities to become parents. And when you're a first-time parent, or even when you're not a first-time parent, it's never what you expect. And so it's an adjustment. And some parents are ready for it and some aren't, or caregivers are ready for it or they aren't. But I think what the babies and what the caregivers have in common is that they're looking for connection. When newborn babies are born, naturally, they are looking for somebody to take care of them and feed them. So while they're trying to organize their environment, they are always looking for somebody to connect with. Who's going to feed me? Who's going to take care of me? Who's going to keep me safe? So the baby's figuring out their patterns. The caregiver is trying to figure out their patterns. And what the baby then starts to figure out, after 8 to 10 weeks, is that when I have this feeling in my stomach and I'm getting kind of uncomfortable and I start to cry because I'm uncomfortable, this person comes in and I get fed. What a wonderful thing. And, it happens 2 hours later. She comes in. So whenever I have this feeling, I can start to expect that she's going to come. So the babies are starting to learn the patterns of the caregiver. And that's an important part of social development, is that we have expectations of the baby and the baby has expectations to us, and we start to work together on that. The parents do more of the work in the beginning, but the babies are working, I think, incredibly hard for what they have going for them, in this whole new world they're dealing with. When a baby, when their nervous system has developed and they are more comfortable in their space and they aren't alarmed by new sensory experiences, and I'm not saying they're not alarmed ever, but they're getting used to this new world that they have, they are able to spend more time just looking at their caregivers and really forming a relationship with them. Certainly they had a relationship starting since birth, but when they really start to look at their caregiver and look in their face and there's an eye gaze, and the caregiver is making certain noises that are appealing to the baby, that's when engagement starts. And in floor time, we refer to it as the gleam in the eye. And what I've come to think of it as when I see it, a child look at me this way in therapy is, oh, she gets me. She understands me. She knows where I'm coming from. And that is such a critical part of development. And it's when a child is working through these things, particularly when they're older, when they're 3, I think we don't give that as much importance as it should have, because we're looking for them to use words and to follow directions and do all that stuff. And I understand the importance of that. But this ability to connect with a little kid and let them know that not only are they cared for by being safe and warm and fed, but they are being cared for because somebody loves them, somebody likes them, somebody's really interested in who they are, that they are being understood and they're being heard. That starts when kids are little babies, and I think become more and more and more important as they get older.
So if on that point, maybe they have that gleam in the eye, and then something else happens later where the parent totally misunderstands them. And they're like, wait a second, I thought that person understood me, but now they don't. But then another moment comes back and they get the gleam in the eye again. So that's a learning process too. And then, on to another topic that we won't even cover, attachment and all of that, when you have insecure attachment because the things are inconsistent, stuff like that. That's another topic. But that whole piece of engagement, I think over time, if they see that you're making that effort as a parent to understand what they're interested in, what they're seeing, what they're doing, like that builds up that trust. Or like your colleague, Dr. Kathy Platzman says, the pennies in the bank, which she said she didn't come up with, but I hear her say it the first time. You're building the pennies in the bank. You're building that trust and security in relationships. So they know this is a person in my world who's safe.
Yes, right. That's exactly right. And the ability to notice when your caregiver doesn't do what you expect, so that there's essentially a breakdown in communication, and the baby cries and the caregiver calms and soothes. The process of noticing that there's a difference, reacting to that, and then the caregiver helping to repair it, and then the baby's social system or nervous system calms down again. That is a huge thing. That is a huge thing, to be able to deal with unexpected things.
Co-regulation.
Right. It's all about regulation. In the beginning, the parent has to help regulate. But what the baby is learning is, I can have this big feeling and I can calm and move on. That's a huge thing in development. And it's a very social thing in development, because in the beginning, parents help babies regulate. So when we're looking at engagement, what happens when a baby gets a gleam in the eye and is excited to see the parent? They're still in a place where they don't have good control of their bodies yet. And parents are still holding the baby like a baby, where the baby is set up to look at a parent's face. They are supporting the social system of the baby. The parents are supporting the sensory system of the baby. So a lot of the things are being taken care of. The baby has the energy and the wherewithal to spend time and focus on a parent's face and watch when the parent smiles and watch when the parent moves their head. And to know that when, the baby may look at the parent and the parent smiles, and that might be too much for the baby, so the baby looks away. But the baby comes back and that parent is still right there. And then they do it again. And, after a few weeks of this, the baby is doing more than just looking. The baby is becoming part of the interaction, part of the reciprocal interaction. So initially, a parent may smile, and then a baby may smile back. Initially, it may be imitation, but when the baby smiles back, the parent doesn't say, oh, it's only imitation, that doesn't count. The parent's over the moon. So then the parent makes a bigger smile. And that may be too much for the baby. So the baby looks away, but the baby comes back and they continue. In the very beginning, when babies are still being held and they're only focusing on their mother's face or their father's face or their caregiver's face, that is the beginning of circles of communication. Initially, it's often the parent that initiates it and the baby responds. Then as the nervous system develops and the baby understands what's going on here, they get longer and longer and longer, these back and forth interactions. There's been a lot of research done on what's happening neurologically between a parent and a baby during these times when the babies are able to stay in interactions with the caregiver when the only focus is on each other's face. Or maybe what a baby might do with an arm if they're batting their arm in front of the parent's face. And, they put on the caps with the sensors, and they're finding out that the brain rhythms are synchronized when they are doing this back and forth interaction. And that's a thing. That's a connection, that is a thing, and it helps neurologically for later communication and for later social interaction and for later just human interactions. When the mother and the baby are together and without toys, without other things, that's called a dyadic interaction, just the two. And you're only looking at faces and smiling and sharing that spirit. When you're in that with the baby, you can call it reciprocity, because it is. You can also call it spirit. You can call it God. You can call it connection. You can call it whatever you want to call it. You can call it quantum entanglement now.
Well, Dr. Stuart Shanker calls it the interbrain between the parent and child.
Yes, it's that too. But whatever you call it, it is something to behold. And it's something to be present in and to enjoy it because the baby enjoys it too. And setting up that inner brain stuff for future interactions is really, really important. So getting back to reciprocity, beginning reciprocity is all about what are called ostensive gestures. Well, kind of as a sidebar, when you talk about gestures that babies make, basically, a lot of people, they just talk about pointing. Is your child pointing? Are they not pointing? And that's like the only gesture anybody cares about. But when babies are younger, 3 to 6 months, and even sooner for some of the facial gestures, those are called ostensive gestures. And those are very important for later social development and for later language development. So ostensive gestures like pitch and melody and eye contact and vocal intensity, how loud you are or how soft you are. If you sing a song, if you make big expressions, all of that are things that babies catalog and make sense out of what that means. When they're in the safe environment without a lot of stuff going on outside of this little cocoon of interaction. I think a lot of people may dismiss that because, babies are typically not in that for a long period of time. As soon as they start sitting up, then they're doing all new things. So these are when little kids are little. But it sets them up for being able to look at a face and see the differences and start to, in essence, read a room. So when you talk about pragmatic language development, which is the ability to use communication in different social situations, you have to have the ability to read a room. That's how you know if you go into a library, you're supposed to be quiet because everybody else is quiet. But if people start to run, And even though you know you're not supposed to run in a library, if you see a bunch of people running, you realize, oh, well, I guess I better be running too. And it turns out there's a fire in the library or something. But there are some kids that will learn no running in the library, and that happens and they don't know what to do because they can't read a room. And the reading of the room, though, comes from looking around and seeing how people are behaving.
So which functional emotional developmental capacity is reading the room? Is that part of the FEDC 4?
It begins in FEDC 4. And as kids have more experiences, then that gets stronger and stronger and stronger. But by 4, if a child, well, we've seen them, if they go down a slide and then they bump at the bottom, they immediately look for their parent. Am I okay? Am I okay? They're looking for their facial expression. That's what I'm talking about, that starts before words, that they're able to read their parents' expressions and realize if they're safe or not. And that's a big part of being able to understand your own emotions. When you're a baby and hopefully you get a wide range of emotions, you also see in your parents a wide range of emotions, and you can kind of attach the way a face might look to the way that you might feel, or the way that the parent might feel based on how their face looks. And here's another sidebar. When kids have a hard time with that, sometimes what we tend to do when kids are crying, and this may be my own personal deal, but we think it's helpful to label it. Oh, you must be frustrated. And then kids learn that whenever they're feeling whatever they're feeling, I'll call it frustrated, but maybe they're not frustrated. Maybe they're sad. Maybe they're angry. Maybe they're hungry. I mean, kids with vulnerable nervous systems, they can be hungry and look like they're frustrated, but it's hunger that they're reacting to. So that can be really confusing when you're learning about emotions and labels for that. So what I tend to do is when kid has a big feeling, I'll say, boy, you have a big feeling. It looks like you need a hug. So that we can agree it's a big feeling and it's something that we're going to do something about. But I'm not going to tell you how you feel because I don't know how they feel.
And they may not know either, and they may or may not want a hug as well.
Right, exactly.
But also that development of interoception. What am I feeling inside of my body? And that's one of the newer senses since my son was diagnosed. Nobody talked about interoception. And then all of a sudden I started hearing about it, 6, 7 years ago, something like that. And now, of course, there's courses on it and everything. But that development of what do I feel inside? Because sometimes autistic kids don't know when they have to go to the bathroom. A lot of them are in diapers for much longer than you would think they should be or whatever. And it's because they don't feel that urge. They don't know when they're hungry. They just wait to be fed.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And so and that's the point. If you're hungry and you're being told you're frustrated, well, that's just confusing. When it's a two-way, kids start to learn the skills that they need to have when it becomes a three-way, when it's joint attention, when there's more people. But it's the skills that they develop when they're babies, when they're being held, when they're looking at their parents, when they're going in back and forth interactions, when they're hearing cooing, when they're imitating cooing. That kind of stuff sets them up for the ability to deal with their own emotions, to look at their parents' faces and, that they have different feelings. That whole thing is not something that just happens when you can label your feelings, when you're 18 months old or 2 years old. It starts earlier. And the reason it starts at 18 months old is because it started so early, you have the ability to make sense out of it and talk about it later.
So I just wanted to jump in and, I can imagine parents listening and saying, okay, that's great, but how do I do this with my kid? And that, there's a billion, well, not a billion literally, but many other podcasts I've done on how to do floor time. And it's why we talk about using affect and really exaggerating gestures and in a genuine way that feels comfortable to you, to entice the child into that interaction so that they do develop this capacity to be able to be reciprocal with others. Because without that foundation, like you're saying, they won't understand that. I know that with my own son, it would be fine with one-on-one, but as soon as he's in a group of 3 or more, all of a sudden all those capacities go out the window and there's too much going on and it's hard. So that tells us there's constrictions in those lower capacities that we need to strengthen and build. And that's why in floor time we're always working on all the capacities at the same time, but it's those foundational ones that we really want to work on solidifying. Can you comment on that a bit?
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, I'm talking about infants because I'm talking about how it develops and how much develops so quickly. The kids I see are 3 and may not be verbal, may not be looking at anybody. And the beginning of this is, number one, are they regulated? Are they calm in their bodies? And by being calm in their bodies, are they calm and attentive? Not just calm, because you can look calm but not be regulated. But are they calm and attentive? Then you have a better chance, I think, of thinking that they're regulated. And are they interested? Which we're kind of talking about therapy, and so we're jumping around a little bit, but I think it's important to talk about it now because we are. For those kids, the most important thing is for them to have fun, for them to want to come back, for them to feel that lady gets me. Interesting, when babies are going through that period when they're, 3 months old, nobody says, look at me. Nobody says, I don't like how you did that. Nobody says, say water. Nobody says that. We take them exactly where they are. Whatever they do is great. We have a great time. And both of us are having a good time. And it's not about teaching a child. It's about being with a child and enjoying a child and letting that child know they're fabulous. Just, if whatever they're doing, they're fabulous. And if they happen to look across the room at a ball, then, oh, I saw you looking at that. Do you want this ball? And go get the ball and bring it over. They'll let you know if they want the ball or not, because they'll push it away if they don't. But it sets up the back and forth if we just join them where they are and let them know they are perfect the way they are. Because that's how I would want to be treated. And I think that's how they want to be treated too. And I feel bad for kids who are 2.5 and are not talking, and maybe for the first time are getting a sense of, well, you're not doing it right, or you need to be doing it more, or things are being withheld until they make a noise. And I don't think that's not development. That's not good development. Anyway, but that's one of my sidebar things. In working with kids that are nonverbal, or in working with kids that are verbal and aren't terribly engaged and may go in a back and forth interaction, but they don't really care what you say. They just let you have a turn, so they have another chance to talk about dinosaurs. Those kids, I find that I want to get them connected with me first. That's the first thing. And to your point, it's about the affect and the smiling and the not talking, or starting to talk and then pausing and give a face so that they look and they're interested and they want to stay and come. And that when they talk about the dinosaurs, I want them to know that dinosaurs is my favorite topic. I'm so glad you came. We're talking about the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it's got hands like a velociraptor. And kids that tend to talk about one thing and not really give anybody else a chance, when you start asking them questions from an authentic point of, I really care about what you're talking about, they will stop and give you a chance to say things and answer your questions. And you start to get a good reciprocal interaction back and forth. And that may be the first time they've ever had a good reciprocal interaction around their animal topic. I'm sure when it first started, they had it, but after a few months, everybody's over dinosaurs, and understandably, caregivers want their kids to talk about other things, but they won't talk about other things until they see the value in talking about things in general.
Mm-hmm.
It's about joining them where they are. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hardest hurdle, especially for parents new to floor time, that understanding that you can't teach these things. It's about getting in there and, yes, you want your child to do this, this, and that, but this is how you're going to have to get there. It's not going to work the way it does with, neurotypical kids or whatever. And it's not developing on its own in the way that you thought it would. So by doing this, which might look like you're doing nothing, it's just play, etc., etc. I'm doing air quotes for those listening on audio. It's not, because it really is how development works. And that example you gave is a perfect way to understand it. You don't say to the baby, look at me, oh, and hold up stuff. And, you don't do that with a baby. It's just a natural progression. But with our kids that are older, we don't know how to do that because they're not babies anymore. But that's where floor time comes in. And that's where learning about how to use floor time and use your affect and join them where they're at, respect their individual differences, follow their emotional intent, use that relationship to build these circles of communication up so that they will eventually be more robust with you, and then slowly build out to with peers in different situations, even when they have different emotions. Because it's one thing to be engaged in reciprocal when you're in a good mood, but what about when you're frustrated and angry? Do you just go have a meltdown, or are you able to co-regulate off of that other person using reciprocity?
Correct. Yes. You made me think of, getting back to what we're talking about, is that when we start talking about the beginning simple reciprocity, that kids learn to initiate, and they learn to respond, and they learn to wait, and they learn to come back, which are huge skills in being able to interact. Again, they're learning these things in a very sheltered environment, which is obviously, that's the way it should be. As kids, as their reciprocity gets stronger and more robust, they are initiating, they are responding, they are identifying when communication breaks down, they are attempting to repair it, they are understanding she doesn't know what I'm talking about. So then they're likely to repair it. Like, for example, if you have a 15-month-old who wants something from the pantry, and they grab you by the hand, and then you've got to get your phone because it's on a table, and you're pulling the other way. No, you got to follow me. So they give you the cue, you're going the wrong way, come with me. You go to the pantry, you open up the door, and he points up to the cookies, and you get him a mustard. And he bats your hand away, and he goes to the cookies again, and you give him something else, and he looks at the cookies again. That's a conversation. That is a wonderful conversation with initiation and response and contingency, that you're staying on the same topic together, that a child has, knows when communication breaks down, knows that they have to fix it. It's not the adult that fixes it, which is something that, in working on reciprocity with kids who are constricted in the ability to do that, I find that it's really helpful when a kid's really motivated to give them a breakdown, because then they are more likely to try to fix it. Otherwise, what I find with a lot of kids is they start to anticipate, well, my mom will help me with this. If I can't communicate this, my mom will do it. So they wait till somebody even steps in and says, do you need help? Which isn't, the fact that they're waiting or anticipating is a wonderful thing. However, to instill in a child that they have agency, that you can do this, is a huge thing. And in getting back to what we were talking about, when kids are 4 months old, they start to move with intention. So they can move their bodies and demonstrate what they're thinking with how they move their bodies. When you start to use intention, and then you start to realize that you're communicating with somebody, then you're moving with agency, and then that's a game changer. And when you move with agency and you understand why you're doing that, then you get to know yourself. And then again, you have another spurt in watching what your caregivers do, and you start to notice that they move with their own intention. They don't necessarily do whatever you want, which is what you think when you're in your mom's arms. And it's only this, this little microcosm of love, which is a wonderful thing. But you're not learning that she does something different. You're learning that we're just vibing together, and it's a wonderful thing. Once a kid is sitting up and can move and can point and can do things, and they move with agency and may look back and say, are you catching this? That's when a step up from the kind of communication you're doing with a baby who's held in your arms to the kind of communication where they become a more active participant. And when they become a more active participant, they watch you. And in watching you, that's when they start to learn that maybe I can learn from this person. She's not somebody that's just fun or will get me what I want, but she's got ideas, this one. And to watch. And when they're at a place where they can do that, which is at a point where your reciprocity is good, you've got complex reciprocity, and you've got a sense of other people think differently. You have a sense of your own emotions, and you can handle them, and that other people have emotions and they can handle them. And you may be thinking about or playing with the same thing, but not necessarily with the same ideas. So you watch each other and you play with each other, and you're thinking, you're doing social thinking. That's when joint attention comes in. And joint attention is basically the same kind of back and forth that you're having with your caregiver when she's in your arms or when you're in her arms, only there's a third thing. So you've still got this thing going with you and your caregiver, but maybe there's a bird outside, or maybe there's an airplane. And because you know that the two of you are doing the same thing, you can guess that that person might be able to hear it too. And so that's why you might point out the window that that's an airplane. I've got a couple of 18-month-olds, and they are and they're fabulous. And they're using a lot of single words, but they're using a lot of gestures. And for a couple of months now, one of them, I see them at their brother's baseball games. And so I get to walk around with them and all that. And it's right by a regional airstrip. So there's lots of airplanes going. So when he hears an airplane, he'll look at me and point up, and we'll both look at it, and I'll talk about, boy, it's an airplane, it's far away. And then as soon as we can't hear it, he goes, like, where'd it go? And then I say, I think it went home or whatever. And then the next airplane comes. And if I'm not looking, he'll take my face and he'll point up again. So again, we're having a conversation too. But this time, it's about a third object, and that we're both paying attention to that. The thing that I think is really interesting is when you have joint attention with somebody, there is what's called a frame of joint attention. So that if you're on the floor playing blocks, you know that what you're going to talk about is the blocks, and, you know, whatever, how you're going to build them and that kind of thing. And that's what you talk about. If you're playing with blocks, nobody's talking about dinner necessarily. You're talking about blocks. So you share that frame of joint attention. Interestingly, when when a baby is in their mother's arms, they have a frame of attention, but it's the baby's frame of attention. And we join them in their frame of attention so that we are always on their page. When you get to a point where you have joint attention, then a child will be able to be in that frame with you. Now, if a baby's playing blocks and you're playing blocks with the baby, but then you happen to, the baby needs a diaper change, and you come over and sit down with the diaper, immediately that baby knows the frame has changed. We're not playing blocks. There's a diaper here. I have to get my diaper changed. And they'll react to that, whether they want to or not. But that's the magic of a joint attention. And that, in combination with your ability to read somebody's face and understand your feelings and understanding that other people have different intentions, that's how you start to read a room too, because you've got that frame of joint attention. Another thing that's interesting about when you get to a level of joint attention is that words are not only to convey a message, words are to get somebody's attention. And you see the difference between kids that use words to get somebody's attention to send a message versus somebody who uses words to get what they want. Because the ability to understand, I've got to get somebody's attention to send a message, and here's my message. When you have joint attention and do that, it's like a 3-for-1. You say a word, but you have somebody's attention, you let them know you got a message, and you send the message. When you don't have joint attention, you can send a message, but you're not sending it to anybody. And a kid can get to joint attention. And part of the way that you do that, or that I do that, is to not immediately get it when they say something. And now I understand when kids are language delayed and they start to say words, we will move heaven and earth to get them what they want, to reinforce that. But what I think what a child starts to understand is everybody thinks like I think. When I say apples, I get an apple. When I say cars, I get a car. Because, and it's not that they're not noticing that you're getting it for them, but they don't have in mind that I've got to get her attention because she might be thinking something differently. That I've got to do that first. It's an important thing. And also what these same kids will often do is they'll ask for, well, in my office, I've got everything up on shelves. So if kids want to play with animals, they'll say cow. And as soon as I act like I'm getting off the floor, they start playing with something else because they've done their job. They told me what I want. Now it's my job to get it and bring it back. And then I sit on the floor. And then they notice I'm on the floor and there's no cow. And then they tell me again. And then I say, oh, I thought you didn't want it because you didn't watch me go get it. And what that does is it starts to get them to realize that, yeah, Mary Beth is helpful, but sometimes she doesn't follow through. So that instills in him that I've got to get her attention and I have to be with her while it happens. That's a big thing about pragmatic language, to know what to do. Teaching a child more vocabulary doesn't instill in them the idea that you have to have somebody's attention first.
Well, thank you so much, Mary Beth, for going over all of these precursors to language, which are just about communication. And it may or may not lead to spoken language, but being able to communicate, being able to have your innermost thoughts and desires understood by someone else, rather than just your wants and needs, being able to share opinions and ideas and all of these things all start with this basic foundation that is outlined in the functional emotional developmental capacities of, regulation, engagement, that reciprocity, that back and forth communication, and getting into understanding how to problem solve with someone else. And it's really helpful to hear you walk through all of that. So thank you so much. And a sneak peek for people, we're going to be doing a second podcast with Mary Beth about conversation. So do you want to give a sneak peek about what that one's going to involve?
I think that one will involve a short review of what we're doing here and how conversations require all the things that you learn when you're in your mother's arms, all the things that you learn when you're in simple reciprocity with somebody, all the things that you use when you're in complex reciprocity, and then with a conversation, you need all that. Plus, you need to realize you have to have the ideas of being able to know past and future and all that kind of stuff, and ideas that you're sharing ideas,
Excellent.
not sharing things you can see, but sharing mental images in each other's heads.
And I guess something that hopefully we'll touch on is that conversation need not be verbal. So people who communicate with assistive technologies,
Yes.
we can touch on that too.
Yeah, and I think especially that with assistive technology, to have conversations, that the reasons for those are to have conversations, not just to say what you want and to regulate others.
Mm-hmm.
So much more to communication than that.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. Stay tuned, listeners. It'll probably be a couple months or so, and we'll have that one going. Thank you so much, Mary Beth.
Thank you, Daria.
Thank you for listening. This episode of We Chose Play was made possible with the generous financial support of Affect Autism's members at patreon.com/affectautism and of the International Council on Development and Learning, ICDL.com. If you liked this episode, please share it with someone, like and subscribe, sign up for the newsletter at affectautism.com, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram.
Until next time, here's to choosing play and experiencing joy every day.
My new book is now available for purchase at your preferred online bookseller, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and others. We Chose Play, Raising an Autistic Child to Thrive and Feel Understood, chronicles my floortime journey with my son, beginning with the shock of his early hospitalization for brain inflammation that led to his autism diagnosis, through my grief and ambiguous loss, to finding and choosing a DIR approach. I outline my understanding of the early functional, emotional, developmental capacities and describe how the autistic experience of each varies with examples. I guide parents through implementing their own floortime approach at home, with or without expensive therapies and services, and talk about the process of personal growth one experiences along the journey. I hope you'll check it out and let me know your thoughts about it. Learn more at affectautism.com/wechoseplay, all one word.